Everybody, this is Mac. He is our black lab, the garden guardian, as it were. He's going to help protect me from all the squirrels while I turn the compost. Greetings, you gorgeous garden gnomes. First off, I just want to give a huge thank you to everybody who has been watching our last video on composting and interacting through comments, leaving likes. We're almost at 2,000 views, which I know is not huge in YouTube world, but for me that is just incredible. I never thought that this early on we would be getting a lot of views, but it means a lot to me that people are watching, liking, and subscribing to our channel. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much. So this channel is serving two purposes. The first is to share and encourage backyard farming or gardening as a form of food security. The second is to help generate funds to support the Kawartha Backyard Farms Food Security Initiative. You see, in our area, which is a very rural agricultural area, over 10% of our population struggle to access healthy and nutritious food, which I think is something that should not happen in our area when there is so much land that can be used to produce food. I believe that growing our own food is an avenue that we can take and should be taking to combat food insecurity. The more food that you grow at home, the more money you'll end up saving by not shopping at grocery stores as often, which will lead you to be able to shop more at local farmers markets or local farm stands, allow you to partake in local entertainment, and allow you to shop at local stores, helping to support your own local economy. I am aware that this is a very nuanced problem. It's not going to be solved just by financial solutions, and it's not going to be solved solely by growing our own food and becoming self-sufficient. But I do believe that it is a simple solution that we can implement that will have a meaningful impact across many different realms, whether that's the economy or environment. It solves a lot of issues. If you also believe in this mission, please help support our channel. So you can leave a like, you can subscribe, and you can plant that bell to get notifications of when we post new videos. In order to achieve monetization through YouTube, we need to reach 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of watch time. We'll be using these funds to help support our Kawartha Backyard Farms Food Security Initiative, where we help local residents set up and maintain their own backyard farms to produce their own food, to share that food with their local community, and to also help support food banks in our area. We'll also be using the funds to help support this channel. So we'll be able to provide you more informative content and maybe more interesting content. So if you do believe in growing food at home as a solution, part of the solution to food insecurity, then please help support the channel, like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell notification to be notified of when we put out new videos. Now let's get to the main video. been 1 week since we built our compost pile, and on the second day, one day after building the pile, the temperature inside got up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. And then on the third day, it got up to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's telling us that our compost pile is thriving with microbial organisms, and that ecosystem in there is doing exactly what we want it to do. It is breaking down all of that carbon and nitrogen material and is going to be producing a lot of nutritious compost that will go onto our beds at the end when it's finished. It is now time, however, to do our first turn of the compost to mix in all that material that isn't breaking down quite yet with some of that older material that has been breaking down and has lots of bacteria and fungi all over it, so that we get a complete breakdown of all those materials by the time it gets to the end. While I do the work of flipping the compost, I'm going to go through some troubleshooting and some common myths about composting to help you improve your own compost system at home. So many people have this thought or notion that composting at home will attract too many unwanted or wild animals, such as mice, other rodents, dogs, cats, and bears maybe. While it is true that an improperly set up or maintained compost system could attract some unwanted animals, using an enclosed structure will help to eliminate that, as well as setting up your compost system properly. When we first moved into our home here, the backyard was all grass, and yet we still had field mice that were wandering around and doing their little field mice things. So we didn't attract mice here because we weren't here yet and setting up the compost. Once we set up our compost, we noticed that it actually helped to keep those mice away from our crops that we were growing. Our compost pile also hasn't noticeably helped to increase the population of these field mice. If it has, I think that we haven't noticed because we do have some predatory birds that live in the area, as well as some cats that people let out. So we're also feeding into that ecosystem where things might be eating the mice. If you live in the country, however, and are concerned about attracting carnivorous animals, bears, or maybe even wolves, depending on your location, you can do some things to help minimize that. Number one is to not add any meats. So the decomposing meat will attract those scavenger and carnivorous animals that you probably don't want in your property. And the second thing is to have your compost system enclosed so that they can't get into your compost. If you do, however, want to compost meats, because you absolutely can compost meat, make sure that you bury it deep into the compost system and that you are in fact hot composting. So making sure that you have those right carbon to nitrogen or browns to greens ratio so that you're getting it hot and there's lots of bacteria and microbes to consume those meat products. The second issue that a lot of people will claim as to why they don't want to start a compost system is that it smells bad. And although this can be true, as you can see, I am inside our compost system and it doesn't smell bad at all. This is because we actively maintain our compost system. So if you just left your compost pile to rot and decompose in place, and you didn't do any sort of maintenance on it, it might start to smell. There are a couple of things that are going to cause this. One is going to be a lack of air, right? We talked about this in the last video, where your compost pile is kind of suffocated and goes anaerobic. So then those anaerobic bacteria really start to smell. Now, that smelly compost will absolutely attract wild animals that you don't want. So to solve this, just turn your compost more often. And you don't have to do a complete flip. You can just kind of zhuzh it around and aerate while it's in place. Every now and then, though, give it a good solid flip. The second cause, and it's also related to air, is adding too much water. So as we mentioned in the last video, if you add too much water, that water will invade the pockets between the materials within your compost system and displace the air. Again, suffocating the bacteria, all the life forms inside of your compost, encouraging that anaerobic bacterial growth, and causing your compost to smell. So to fix adding too much water or having too much water in your compost, simply turn. It's going to be a common theme in your compost. Turn the compost, don't add any more water, and cover your compost. So we have a tin roofing on top of our compost. You could use a tarp though, which is very easy to get a hold of and easy to put on and take off of your compost pile. Hold it down with some logs or a cinder block or a shovel. I don't know. Hold it down somehow. The third most common reason that people's compost piles start to smell is because they've added too many greens. So all the nitrogen material is going to release some water into your compost pile. It also won't break down as fast, and if you don't have enough carbon in your compost, when those green materials break down and release the water, there's nothing for it to get soaked up by. So that brown material, carbon-rich material, acts as a sponge and will draw the excess moisture away from your green material. The nitrogen containing materials, if you have too many of them, can lead to the buildup of ammonia and urea. So that's going to give it that foul smelling kind of bathroom smell to your compost. To fix this, again, turn your pile. While you turn your pile, make sure to add a little bit of extra carbon to help soak up that extra water and help to feed those microbes the carbon so that they can continue to break down the nitrogen-rich materials. Now, this third reason that people tend to avoid composting at home was something that I heard of when I was a kid, and I never thought could actually ever happen. But I just found out the other day that it actually has happened. Spontaneous combustion and compost piles catching fire. I never thought that a compost system would be able to generate enough heat to spontaneously combust and catch on fire. Now, this is not going to happen at your backyard compost pile. There are significant factors that have to all be happening at the same time for a compost pile to spontaneously combust and catch on fire. Number one is the size of your compost pile. Where we see this happen is in municipality composting systems where the compost piles aren't being properly managed. So the compost pile is allowed to get too big, up to 30 feet or 10 meters. If we had a compost pile in our backyard that was 10 meters, that's huge. It would tower over our house, and we definitely would have a bylaw called on us by our neighbors. So large piles like that can create enough heat and pressure for that material to self-ignite. The second factor that plays into it is the composition of the compost pile. Typically, municipalities will receive a lot of yard waste from their residents, which contain sticks, leaves, woody materials. This is fantastic fuel for a fire. And if you're not properly maintaining a large compost system like a city would, then it absolutely can catch on fire. Now, our compost systems are definitely not big enough to catch fire, nor do they contain enough carbon materials to fuel a fire once it starts. So you can be safe in knowing that your compost system at home is highly unlikely to catch on fire. Reason number 4 that people tend to avoid doing their own composting is that they'll claim that it takes too long. Now, an unmanaged or improperly managed compost system absolutely could take a season or multiple seasons to break down if you just left your compost pile and you didn't properly add browns and greens, you never turned your pile. It could take a very long time to break down. And in fact, some people who like to use leaf mold in their gardens will leave leaf towers to decompose over multiple years. So if you're maybe slightly more impatient or you need compost faster, you can speed up that process by, again, mixing the right amount of carbon and nitrogen containing material. So those browns and greens, you can speed it up by also turning it more often. Typically, a compost will go from the start to complete finish in 6 weeks if you're actively managing it. Some people will claim that they can create compost, finished compost, in as little as 18 days by turning it every day. Number 5 is that you don't have enough room. Now, we have a fairly large compost system here. So large, in fact, that I can sit inside of it kind of comfortably. I don't actually have to hunch that much, maybe almost live in here. But you do not have to build a compost system as large as we have it. You don't have to have 3 bays or 2 bays. You could do it with 1 bay, or you can use a composter that you buy from the city, or typically black little bins, and they do really well. They don't take up a whole lot of space. The minimum size recommendation for your compost system is about 1 cubic meter, or 1 yard if you are in the States. That size of compost system will allow you to add enough material so that it gets hot and hopefully will achieve the temperatures high enough to kill bad bacteria and maybe even seeds. And the 6th reason that people tend to avoid composting at home is because they don't know where to locate their compost system. Our first compost system was a 2-bay system and was built out of reclaimed pallet wood. The nice thing about the size of our first compost system and the black bins that you can get from your local municipality or from hardware stores is their size. They are easily movable. You can move those compost systems all over your property until you find a location that works for you. Portable compost bins, like those black ones, are also great because you can add fertility to certain sections of the garden and not have to lug around a lot of compost. So you could put your compost bin on the corner of your garden where you want to start adding some fertility to. Fill that bin up, and then once it's broken down enough, don't dig out the contents of the compost bin. Simply lift the compost bin up, move it to a new section of your garden, and start filling that up there. The old section where you had your compost bin, use a rake, push that compost around, and you've just added a ton of fertility to that space. All right, please do not judge my fitness level off of how hard I am breathing right now. I'm not going to lie to you, that was a workout. So if you have a compost turn to do on your to-do list, skip the gym for today. There we go. That is our first turn. We're going to leave that to heat up again. We'll leave this to heat up or to stay hot, and we'll come back in a week or so to do another turn. It'll go into the last bay, and then we will let it mature there until probably the spring. So all we've got to do now is to add our thermometer back into the middle of the pile. And watch it get hot.